Well, welcome everybody, and thank you so much for coming out tonight to the Camden County Historical Society. My name is Chris Perks, and it's my privilege to be the president of the Board of Trustees. We have a couple other trustees with us tonight. I see Bob Shin was here, and still is here, and Derek Davis was here, and Sandra Turner Barnes, who's also on the program. You're going to hear from her a little bit later.
So we land in Montgomery, get on the bus, and we're going to go to Birmingham. On the buses, we're covered, Secret Service, helicopters to fight over top, make sure we're all safe. I'm safe. Once again, geez, a kid from Camden. Then we go to 16th Street Baptist Church, where 4 children were killed. Also, we go to the Civil Rights Museum across the way from there. And let me tell you something. I met Councilman Norcross years ago. Different situations. I was running against his people. But we talked afterwards. We became friends after that. Let me tell you what I seen with Congressman Norcross as you walk through the museum down there and see the exhibits down there. You could see the change on his face as he watched and went through the exhibits. As you watch things on the newsreels, you would see the change on this man's face. Like it was like a shock to him, what he has seen. See, it's one thing to read about this stuff in the newspapers, see it on TV, but to actually be there in this location and go to a museum that has all the artifacts in there and see my brother from another mother, as I call him, his face changed. Because he's like a little bit of a tough guy, electrician, a tough guy. But to see that emotion and to see the moistening in his eyes wasn't fake. It was real to see what he saw down there. Then to go to the church where the children were killed at, to sit in that church and look at that site. Then to go across the street to the park where they had beat and hosed young people and see the statues there. Again, I'm walking with him. He ain't faking it. The man is feeling this. He's feeling what we felt during that time period. Now you see it up close and personal. The next day is the big day. Go to Selma. We go to the church where they met prior to cross the bridge. And once again, we're on the buses going toward the bridge, and the streets are full of people on both sides of the street. We go off the bus, Secret Service, there with us. I'm walking. People are waving at me, shaking my hand. Son of the whip. Hey, how you doing? How you doing? You know? Yeah. I'm kissing babies. I'm doing all kinds of stuff, you know. They think it's my bodyguard. Changed up. But we go to the bridge, wait for President Obama to get there, and he speaks. And then to get a chance to walk across that bridge, the bridge I seen as a child on TV, to get there and see that Edmund Pettus Bridge, and to actually walk across that bridge, know what took place there. And who led us across there? The President and Congressman Lewis, who is one of the nicest persons in the world. No, in the universe. This man is an outstanding man. Just to talk to him, I just want to hug him. I said, can I hug you? Sure, I want to hug this man because this is a piece of our history. Somebody on the front lines. Nobody coming after the fact or in the back of the line, front of the line. And they had that white coat on too, but you can pick it right out when this thing happened on Bloody Sunday. So to be there to cross that bridge with the president and my congressman, what a day. The next day, Montgomery. Big day for me because I want to go to the Capitol to stand on the same steps that George Wilder stood on, saying the things he said. And for me to stand on those steps that day and know from whence we have come to where we're at that moment in time was a great thing. I call those three sites, Montgomery, Birmingham, and Selma, the ground zero of civil rights. Think about all the things that take place in this country, but it all centers around those three locations. We all know what they mean. We all know about Montgomery, the bus boycotts, ground zero. We all know about Selma, the bridge. Birmingham, the four little girls. I call it, once again, the ground zero of civil rights. That's one of the most amazing things that's happened to me in my political career, is on that one weekend. And to be chosen by this man here, out of all the folks that he knows in his first district, to be one of those chosen persons. I know Reverend Collins feels the same way, to be chosen to go to this historical site. And me being like a history major type dude was a big thing to me, because my best grades in school was in history and social studies. Gym. And I failed lunch one time. I think I failed sandbox in daycare, but history was my thing. And to be able to go to these sites, the ground zero, was one of the most amazing things in my political life. So I want to thank you again, Congressman, for thinking of me. Of all the folks you could take, your grandson, who I know you love so much, other people, donors who give to the campaign, but of all the people you chose on that occasion, my 50th anniversary, you asked me to go. I would ever be grateful for you considering me. God bless you, and thank you all.
I have to break this to the sheriff. I didn't pick you. Somebody else did. Right? How many people here have seen the movie Selma? So, Whip had indicated when we were at the church and we're at the steps. And do we remember how that movie opened? That explosion that just stunned you. And Chris, not to take all his thunder from his presentation, while we were in the Civil Rights Museum, there's a display of one of the young girls, her shoes, her little pocketbook that she was carrying, and a piece of brick taken from her skull. It's hard to believe, but it is part of our legacy. And speaking of legacy, we're blessed to have some with a Lawnside native. Let's hear for our friends in Lawnside, proud descendant. And we were blessed to have her with us when we dedicated one of the markers for the slave drop-off here in Camden over at Rutgers at that time. And it was a beautiful poem. Here to share with us her poem for today, Sandra Turner Barnes.
Good evening. This is the day that the Lord has made. It's a wonderful day, although a sad day as well. I want to acknowledge that in the year 1968, the town of Lawnside made Martin Luther King's birthday a holiday. That we didn't wait for anybody else, but it just was so critical. He's such a hero. This year, and I wanted to say, I too have been to Selma, also walked on this bridge. I was invited for the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday to do poetry there. Amazing opportunity. But this year is so important. 50 years. this time. So this poem is entitled A Legacy That Endures. America's civil rights struggle involved treacherous years, days and nights filled with horror and strife, danger, death, and destruction everywhere. Like slavery, this evil ensured a heartbreaking life. But there arose a brave, committed Black man during the Montgomery bus boycott who peacefully and steadfastly stood for us. Back down? No. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would not. Martin despised the cowardly bombings of churches, the lynching and murder of innocent Black folk, men and women who placed their lives in death's hands simply for the equal opportunity to vote. And why should the simple, basic dream of a decent life, education, a better paying job, guarantee a cross burning outside your door, placed there by a spineless, sheet-wearing mob? Still, Martin wouldn't let nobody turn him around. He stood solidly on God's holy word, for he had been taught at a very early age that his role was to lead and to serve. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, Martin declared from that small southern town. And the evildoers responded in anger and hate, determined to pull this upright man down. Lord, Martin endured so many difficult days, fulfilling God's task, uplifting his sisters and brothers, reminding us all that life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are we doing for others? And so while working and marching tirelessly, each day giving all he had to give, Martin revealed, if a man hasn't discovered something he's willing to die for, then he isn't fit to live. Yes, Lord, Martin Luther King Jr. died 50 years ago today. But the one thing the wicked never understood, the evil they thought would devastate America, well, God worked it all out for the good. For those evil ones tried to erase Martin from our world and bring his nonviolent good work to an end. But each new year that passes by, an even greater MLK mission begins. Another empowering day of service, Americans, Black and white, seeking a better way, embracing humanity's greater good, all on Martin's special day. And although Martin's dream has yet to come true, our love and respect will remain for 1,000 years or more. Yes, we thank God for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and for his legacy, which will forever endure. Thank you.
It was just brought to my attention, I had not known this, that Maya Angelou's birthday is today. She would have been 90. Wow. Well, now is the time we've been waiting for. Chris was so kind to make the time available, not only to talk to us tonight, but to go down with, because I knew Chris for some time, but I didn't know him. I like to say I know Chris now. When you share such an emotional opportunity, a time, an event, it makes an impression on you. It certainly does me. And as we took that picture together, and you'll see it in one of the clips, I am a man, remind ourselves why Dr. King was in Memphis. Yes, there was the greater cause, racism, but it was about economic justice back then. $1 a day for those sanitation workers. And one of the most remarkable things, and you'll see it in the clip, is one of the sanitation workers that was there 50 years ago was there when we were there 2 weeks ago and is still working on the job. Still working on that job. I am a man resonates today as it always is. And what better way to introduce Reverend Chris Collins.
Certainly, I want to thank Congressman Donald Norcross, and I would like to echo the same words that Sheriff Wilson said. It was extremely honorable to be chosen to go on this pilgrimage with the congressman. How did this happen for me? 2 years ago, when the congressman came back from his pilgrimage with the sheriff, and it seemed like every community meeting when he would talk about it, just as you see today, you could see the fire and the passion in his eyes. And in January, we were at the aquarium, and I said to him, I said, you always talk about the feeling that you had when you walked across that Edmund Pettus Bridge with Congressman John Lewis and President Barack Obama. If you ever would like to write about it, I would love to have it in the Anointed News Journal. And he said to me, well, why don't we wait until March for the anniversary? And I said, wow, I would love to have that experience one day. And he said, well, I get two people, you and me. And he told Mary to make sure she notified me, and it was on. And let me say, it was definitely an experience of a lifetime. I believe that every American should go on this pilgrimage, just as the Muslim go to Mecca, the Indian goes where Gandhi went. I mean, we should be on this pilgrimage. We were extremely fortunate. I believe that everyone has their own Dr. King story. Memphis has their story at Mason Temple and Lorraine Motel. Birmingham can talk about the bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church, and Montgomery could talk about the bus boycotts and Dexter Avenue and King's House, and Selma can talk about Bloody Sunday. But we were so fortunate that in a short 3 days, with no downtime, we started our journey and we went to every place on the Civil Rights Trail. And it was absolutely amazing. So I want to thank Congressman Donald Norcross for, as the sheriff said, choosing me and giving me that opportunity. Thank you. So our journey began in Washington, D.C., and as the sheriff said, when you have half of the members of Congress on a journey with you, the security and protection is absolutely insane. If you've ever been to Washington, D.C., you know how difficult it is to navigate through the streets of Washington. And we had no issues whatsoever. We had the motorcycle brigade in front of us, and we had Capitol Police with us. And when we got to the airport, I'm thinking, we got to go through security checkpoints. No, the bus drove right up on the runway, right to the door of the airplane, to the steps. And when you looked out the window, there were machine guns all around the perimeters, and we were safe. We had to get off the bus and get on the plane, and so we did. And when we flew into Memphis, Tennessee, which was our first destination, the same security applied. What was added is that we had a helicopter above us that watched from the sky. Our first stop was to Mason Temple. Here you see Congressman Donald Norcross, the legendary Congressman John Lewis, and myself outside of Mason Temple, which is the flagship headquarters for the Church of God in Christ organization. Mason Temple was a special place because this is where Dr. Martin Luther King gave his final speech. And as we move on, I will play that final speech, and it will also give you an overview of why this event took place. We were there in support of the sanitation workers. This gentleman here, you have Mr. Capehart, who is a national journalist, MSNBC, and also the Washington Post. This gentleman here is Mr. Elmore Nickelberry. He is the gentleman that Congress Norcross, I believe, fell in love with, who back in 1968, he was working 9 hours a day for $1.25. Today, at the age of 89, he still drives the sanitation truck, and he's making $17 an hour and still has no pension. These were the conditions in Memphis, and the city of Memphis offered Mr. Nickelberry and all the other sanitation workers $50,000 just to forget about it. And he said to them, that's not enough money. He told us how he would empty trash bins and he would be filled with maggots and all kind of critters, and when he would go home, he couldn't walk in the house. He had to get undressed outside before he could go inside. Bishop Charles Harrison Mason, I believe, was the founder of Mason Temple, or they named us in honor of him. It is now under the leadership of Bishop Charles Blake, who is the national spokesperson for the Kojic organization. So Mason Temple is where, here's the congressman with Mr. Nickelberry, and this gentleman here is Mr. Nickelberry's son, who is now the person that's in charge of the sanitation department in Memphis, and he still allows his father to work. His father's pretty sharp. And again, just outside of Mason Temple. So while we were in Mason Temple, and we'll go to the next slide. Okay, we'll back up. What I would like to do at this point, I just want you to hear the final speech of Dr. King, and we're not going to play all of it. We're just going to do a few excerpts of it, and I just want you to listen. Now, this particular night, as you'll hear, Dr. King really was not supposed to be there because he wasn't feeling well. But when Reverend Abernathy showed up and Andrew Young, and they saw that there was a standing crowd of 11,000 people there, they sent someone to get Dr. King and said, just make some remarks. And this particular speech was a speech that he did not write. He, as we say, he went straight from the hip.
He has it on his phone. Yeah. You know what? We have it right
Okay. Now, what you heard there was actually the conclusion of the speech. But what I wanted to do was give you a deeper understanding of what actually was going on. And I just want you to listen to this introduction real quick. And this came from
Introduction
Andrew
to I've
Young.
Been to the Mountaintop, written and read by Andrew Young.
Hello, I'm Andrew Young. No speech of Martin Luther King's has provoked as much discussion and debate as the message he gave to the people of Memphis, Tennessee, at the Mason Temple Church of God in Christ the night before he was assassinated. He spoke without notes and seemingly without forethought as he poured forth a powerful stream of consciousness narrative before a standing room crowd of 11,000 people. It was awesome. And in response, the people produced what German theologian Rudolf Otto described in his classic, The Idea of the Holy, as that powerful spiritual transformation of an earthly situation into a transcendent religious moment via the Mysterium Tremendum. God was in this place. And yet, none of those close to Martin thought that there was anything final about the address. We had heard him make the same references on several previous occasions. Usually, I might add, when the situation was in some way particularly dangerous. Nevertheless, we had all lived through these dangers, and there was no reason to believe that we would not do so again. Memphis did not seem as dangerous as Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1964, or the mobs in Chicago in 1967, or the times when Martin reminded us that he had seen the promised land. Martin Luther King Jr. had lived his life in the shadow of the cross for the past decade. As a young author, 29 years old, he'd been stabbed with a letter opener by a demented woman in Harlem. He often referred to the fact that the blade pressed against the main aorta of his heart, and if he had merely sneezed, it would have severed the artery and he would have bled to death. He once received a beautiful note from a 10-year-old girl who said, "I'm a little white girl, but I thank God that you didn't sneeze." Martin often discussed this near-death experience to remind his followers that death was an ever-present possibility. He usually did so in a rather joking manner, concluding for us that we had better be ready to die. If you haven't found something for which you're willing to die, you're not fit to live, he said. On more serious occasions, which were very rare, he reminded us of the scar shaped like a crucifix that remained on his chest as a result of the event. Each morning as I brush my teeth and wash my face, I'm reminded by the cross-shaped scar on my chest that each day and any day could be my last day on this earth. Then he'd smile and say, "We'd better make sure that what we're doing is worth dying for." April 3rd, 1968 had been a dreary day. We had come back to Memphis only because Martin wanted us to. Since our previous march, which had begun peacefully, had been disrupted by rowdy young people paid to promote a violent confrontation with police. We were accustomed to provocateurs within, attempts at distortion and misinformation from U.S. government sources. But this was a simple garbage workers' strike, union recognition, and a wage that would at least reach the poverty level were the simple goals of the demonstration. Who could reasonably be threatened by such minimal objectives in this day and age? We were not aware, however, of how seriously threatened the Congress and the White House were at the thought of 3,000 disciplined, organized, nonviolent protesters coming to Washington to wage a campaign for the rights of the poor. After all, President Lyndon Johnson had launched a war on poverty, only to have it bogged down by the war in Vietnam. Martin's hope was to free up the Johnson administration to get back to a domestic agenda. For no nation could survive with people isolated on lonely islands of poverty in the midst of this ocean of material wealth. He also warned, the bombs you drop on Vietnam will explode at home in inflation and unemployment. The fears were greater than we imagined. Martin must have felt those fears because he was fighting a cold and fearing the flu, something that only happened when he was feeling enormous stress. He was never sick and seldom took medicine. Physically, he was as strong as a bull. But when the internal demons of doubt and anxiety clawed at him, he would feign illness and go in for a checkup to rest and give himself time to think. He was in St. Joseph's Hospital in Atlanta in 1964 when he received word that he had been awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace. On April 3rd, he had been feeling ill and talking about taking a few days off for a checkup. He was as depressed as I'd ever known him. He decided he was not going to the church and asked Ralph Abernathy to speak and apologize for him. But when Ralph and I arrived and saw the overflow crowd at Mason Temple, we sent Bernard Lee back to the hotel to ask Martin to come and simply make an appearance. Ralph would speak. Martin would simply make a few remarks. Ralph Abernathy's introduction was more than a half hour long. He reminded Martin and the crowd of the long struggle they'd waged since Montgomery in 1955. It was classic Ralph, country preacher, friend, and brother, whose rousing oratory had raised the hopes and spirit of the crowd so much that Martin, who had been physically feverish, forgot himself and reached down into his well of spiritual strength and gave his last prophecy. Did he know? He always knew that some speech would be his last. Was he afraid? Not on your life. The next day was one of the happiest of his life. Surrounded by his brother, his staff, and close friends of the movement, he laughed and joked all day until it was time to go to dinner at 6 p.m. Standing on the balcony, waiting for Ralph to get ready, and trying to decide whether it was necessary to take a coat, a shot rang out. He was killed instantly as the bullet severed his spinal cord just below the chin. Only then did his spirit begin to soar across the oceans and into the hearts of people seeking freedom everywhere. They killed the dreamer at 39 years of age. But the dream will live on into the new millennium, and men and women must still learn to resolve their problems with the full force of truth, the power of love and faith, and in the Spirit to lead us all into a new promised land where the wicked shall cease from troubling and the weary shall be at rest. Amen.
Let us move on. In these powerful days, these days of challenge, to make America what it ought to be, we have an opportunity to make America a better nation. And I want to thank God once more for allowing me to be here with you. You know, several years ago, I was in New York City autographing the first book that I had written. And while sitting there autographing books, a demented black woman came up. The only question I heard from her was, "Are you Martin Luther King?" And I was looking down writing, and I said, "Yes." The next minute, I felt something beating on my chest. Before I knew it, I had been stabbed by this demented woman. I was rushed to Harlem Hospital. It was a dark Saturday afternoon. That blade had gone through and the x-rays revealed that the tip of the blade was on the edge of my aorta, the main artery. And once that's punctured, you're drowned in your own blood. That's the end of you. It came out in the New York Times the next morning that if I had merely sneezed, I would have died. Well, about 4 days later, they allowed me, after the operation, after my chest had been opened and the blade had been taken out, to move around in the wheelchair in the hospital. They allowed me to read some of the mail that came in, and from all over the states and the world, kind letters came in. I read a few, but one of them I will never forget. I had received one from the president and the vice president. I've forgotten what those telegrams said. I'd received a visit and a letter from the governor of New York, but I've forgotten what that letter said. But there was another letter that came from a little girl, a young girl, who was a student at the White Plains High School. And I looked at that letter, and I'll never forget it. It said simply, "Dear Dr. King, I am a 9th grade student at the White Plains High School." She said, "While it should not matter, I would like to mention that I'm a white girl. I read in the paper of your misfortune and of your suffering. And I read that if you had sneezed, you would have died. I'm simply writing you to say that I'm so happy that you didn't sneeze. And I want to say tonight, that I too am happy that I didn't sneeze, because if I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1960, when students all over the South started sitting in at lunch counters. And I knew that as they were sitting in, they were really standing up for the best in the American dream and taking the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1961 when we decided to take a ride for freedom and ended segregation in interstate travel. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been around here in 1962. The Negroes in Albany, Georgia, decided to straighten their backs up. And whenever men and women straighten their backs up, they are going somewhere, because a man can't ride your back unless it is bent. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been here in 1963. The black people of Birmingham, Alabama, aroused the conscience of this nation and brought into being the Civil Rights Bill. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have had a chance later that year in August to try to tell America about a dream that I had had. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been down in Selma, Alabama to see the great movement there. If I had sneezed, I wouldn't have been in Memphis to see a community rally around those brothers and sisters who are suffering. I'm so happy that I didn't sneeze. And they were telling me, now it doesn't matter now. It really doesn't matter what happens now. I left Atlanta this morning, and as we got started on the plane, there were 6 of us. The pilot said over the public address system, "We are sorry for the delay, but we have Dr. Martin Luther King on the plane, and to be sure that all of the bags were checked, and to be sure that nothing would be wrong on the plane, we had to check out everything carefully, and we've had the plane protected and guarded all night. And then I got into Memphis, and some began to say the threats, or talk about the threats that were out. What would happen to me from some of our sick white brothers? Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
All right. And I felt that that was important to play that because we have young people here, and they may not, we can talk about Dr. King, but they may not really understand what we're talking about. So I wanted to give a little synopsis so they would have a better understanding. So that was Mason Temple, and when we sat there, we're looking at the pulpit, and we're looking at the podium, but yet they're playing this tape, and you just felt the presence of Dr. King. When we left Mason Temple, we went around to the Lorraine Motel, which is now the National Civil Rights Museum. So this slide on the right is the backside of the building where James Earl Ray, the assassin, was inside the building, about 200 meters across from the balcony. And we'll go to the next slide. If you go to the Lorraine Motel today, Dr. King's vehicles are still parked right outside the room where he was assassinated. And what was very interesting to us is that this was not the first time he was in Memphis. Normally in Memphis, he would stay in room 307, and it was never publicized that he was in town. But this particular time, he was in room 306, and it was made known that Dr. King was in town that night. This is myself. Congressman captured me in a moment where this is a glass casing of the actual room. That's room 307, which was a full-size bed, single room. And then behind us was 306, which was double beds where Dr. King and Reverend Ralph Abernathy, they were all staying in that room together. This was very touching to me. When you go through the museum, there are various exhibits that paint the picture of the whole civil rights. The reason why the lunch counter was very moving to me is because one of the exhibits that you saw, they were protesting the Woolworths in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And my father was a store manager of Woolworths through, from the 70s all the way to the late 80s. And my father was not the rah-rah civil rights movement type of guy. He would listen to Dr. King's albums, but he would allow me to go to work with him as a child. And at lunchtime, I would go to the counter, I would get a sandwich, a slice of pound cake, and a glass of milk, and they would serve me. It didn't hit me until 5 years ago when I was teaching a class that even though he couldn't sit at that counter, he made sure his son sat at that counter. And that just kind of was very touching to me. And this is the I Am a Man exhibit that the congressman and I, when we talked with Mr. Nickelberry, and there were a few other sanitation workers there. And this was an exhibit in honor of them, just letting the world know, hey, you know, we're men as well. And again, this is the room 306, exactly the way it was the night Dr. King was assassinated. You know, the one bed half made, the glass of milk, everything is the same way it was. It's glassed in, and outside, right underneath the room, you see the two vehicles there that's now protected. They can't move from that location anymore. One of the Greyhounds was bombed. Congressman that's looking at some of the exhibits, we found that this was very interesting. In 1960, if you look at the map of the United States, these were the electoral votes, which you can see the entire United States predominantly was red states. And 4 years later, 1964, everything changed to blue. All right? And that's us right outside. We were able to participate in a wreath laying ceremony outside of Dr. King's. When we left about 4:30, when we left Memphis, we flew into Birmingham, and this is a picture of all the pilgrims. We were all called pilgrims at that time. When we went into Memphis, there was about 180 of us. In Memphis, we picked up some more, and we wound up with about 210 of us that went on the rest of the journey right outside of 16th Street Baptist Church. And 16th Street Baptist Church, you know, as emotional as the Lorraine Motel experience was and Mason Temple, we were about to turn it up a few notches here. We had a wreath laying ceremony, and the young lady, that's Joan Mooney, who is the president and CEO of an organization called Faith and Politics Institute. They are the organization that put this civil rights pilgrimage on every year. And as you can see, Steny is the Congressman Steny to her side, Congressman John Lewis, Barbara Lee, and you have 3 of the 4 Donalds. There's 4 Donalds in Congress, and 3 of them were there with the exception of our Congressman Donald Payne out of North Jersey. And where are we going? We're going to the side of 16th Street Baptist. They have a monument stone here. This is the exact position where the bomb exploded that killed the 4 little girls. So inside 16th Street Baptist Church, this is what it looks like. Now, when the bomb exploded, all the windows were blasted out, except this window. On this window, the only thing that was blasted out was the center of Christ's face. Everything else remained intact. And now here we have a panel discussion of 3 individuals. We had the Reverend Dr. McKinstry, Reverend Dr. Bernard Lafayette, and we have Miss Daniel here. Now, each of them had their own story. Miss Daniel was the daughter of a pastor, I believe at Bethel Church, which was in that town, and she told the story of how her church was bombed, and they all were able to make it out safely when her church was bombed. McKinstry, when she shared the story, she was 14 years old the night when that bomb exploded at 16th Street Baptist. She was there. Those girls that lost their life in the bombing, they were her friends. She said to me that the one girl, her father was their school teacher. And she also talked about 2 other young men that lost their lives, and one of the guys was the photographer for the community. He did all the black events. He was the camera guy, and he lost his life. Bernard Lafayette, his story was extremely amazing. This is a gentleman who was beaten and arrested 27 times. In fact, he corrected himself and said he was beaten 27 times, but he was thrown in a jail 30 times because he was arrested an additional 3 times while he was already in jail. And he said that there was a day that he went into the Greyhound, which was supposed to have been desegregated at that time, and 14 cab drivers came in there and they beat him. And when they got done, he stood up and he looked at them in their eyes because he wanted to see the very essence of their soul. And he said to them, "Now, if you gentlemen are finished, I'd like to make my phone call now." And that was Bernard Lafayette. He is also the gentleman that on Bloody Sunday, after people of Selma were trampled on and beaten with billy clubs, and some of the young people wanted to go get their guns and retaliate, he was the one that stepped in and reminded them that this is a non-violent protest. This statue, this is across the street from 16 Baptist, is at a place called Keller Park. This park has all the statues of what the people of Birmingham went through. This is Dr. King's statue here. I'm looking at it. I've been to Atlanta, I've been to DC, but this statue was somewhat different. And as you can see, Congressman here, and we're both having our moments. And this particular statue, on all the other statues I saw born a certain date and died a certain date. This statue says born, and then it says assassinated. It reminds you that Dr. King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. And that's what it says here, assassinated. The dogs, Doberman Pinschers, German Shepherds that were unleashed on children. Bernard Lafayette said the church, they would argue among each other because the church said, why are we using children? We're supposed to protect our children. It got to the point that children were cutting school, climbing through the windows because they wanted to be involved in the movement. Then the argument became, how do we stop the children? And I want to go back to that slide one more time. I want to show, this is the hose. Looks like a military bazooka. This is the hose that they use to hose down children. All right? This is across the street. We had a dinner reception, and they had another Civil Rights Museum exhibit. The difference between the black classroom and the white classrooms, and that's an image of black protesters in Atlantic City, New Jersey, in front of the Woolworth store. And this plaque here, there were so many bombings going on in Birmingham at that time that they changed the name from Birmingham to Birmingham, Alabama. Local artists did a life-size portrait of Congressman John Lewis, and we unveiled it that night. It looked pretty much just like him. He smiled. And this is an interview with Dana Bash from CNN and the Senator Doug Jones, who we know last year just won the Senate race after many years of Republican Senate. And as I throw myself a plug, and I want to thank Minister Wasim Muhammad for filming us tonight for our school district channel, and Mr. Miller. On this journey, we were under camera completely with CNN. CNN was with us every step of the way. They got quite a bit of footage with the interaction between Congressman Norcross and myself. We were very much engaged throughout the journey. We also had MSNBC and the Anointed News Journal. We were the only media nationally that covered this event. All right. And Congressman with Martin Luther King III and his wife and daughter. And this is just a painting, a mural on the wall in the basement of the King Memorial Baptist Church. Once we left in Birmingham, then we got on the bus and we drove to Montgomery. In Montgomery, we stopped at Dexter Avenue, King Memorial Baptist Church, and that's when Martin Luther King III had spoken to us. And after his speech, and we do have a little bit of his speech, we had a different panel discussion. This panel was an all-white panel, and they were children of the movement. So we had this young lady here, who is the daughter of Governor George Wallace. We had this gentleman who grandfather was the Ku Klux Klan, his father was the Ku Klux Klan, his 4 brothers were Ku Klux Klan, but he and his wife joined John Lewis and became Freedom Riders. Then we had Mary Liuzzo, Lulube. Her mother, Viola Liuzzo, was a woman that after Bloody Sunday, when Dr. King put the call for everyone to come to Selma, Viola Liuzzo was a woman married with 5 children in Detroit, Michigan, who drove to Selma, and she used her vehicle to transport black people from the meeting camps to the bus station, to the churches. She would transport food. On her last trip, transporting a gentleman by the name of Leroy. Unfortunately, he was battling the flu and couldn't be with us that day. While she was transporting him, members of the Ku Klux Klan pulled up beside her and shot her car up with a shotgun. The car went off the road. The Ku Klux Klan wanted to make sure that they were dead. Leroy was not dead, but when he saw him coming, he bent over, put his head into Viola's lap. The Klansmen saw both bodies covered in blood and assumed that they were dead and left. Leroy lived to testify. Now, this gentleman here is the son of the federal judge who protected John Lewis and Dr. King back at those days, because they knew that the state troopers didn't mean them any good. They knew that they didn't have much support, so he protected them. But it was his father who prosecuted the Klansmen that killed Viola Liuzzo, that killed Mary's mother. Those two had not met until the day before, on that day, the day before that. So that was, the intensity was just climbing. And so as they talked about their experiences of being children of the movement, and Miss Kennedy Wallace shared her experience, that it meant so much for her to stand on the steps, as Sheriff Wilson said, of the Capitol, to stand on the steps with the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., Bernice King, and to embrace each other and tell each other that they love each other. And that's what happened. This monument is a monument of individuals who were killed for civil rights. And engraved are the names of different people. You'll see Viola Liuzzo's name on there. And it's a fountain in the middle. We laid the wreath. And this young lady, or this woman and her husband, is the mother of, or the parents of Heather Heyer, which was the young lady who lost her life last year when the hate crime in Charlottesville, Virginia, when the guy ran the car and ran over people. So that was a very touching moment. Again, when we left Dexter Avenue, we went around to First Baptist, which was the church where Reverend Abernathy was the pastor. Here, this is Mrs. Juanita Abernathy. We went to that church for lunch, and let me tell you, barbecue ribs, fried chicken, barbecue chicken, oxtail, pig feet, banana pudding. I found out that this guy's favorite food is banana pudding. I think he had 5 banana puddings in 2 days. And so Miss Abernathy jumped me for some ribs. I said, Miss Abernathy, if you're going to jump me, you got to give me a hug. And that's what she did. All right. So it was just so honorable, because we're walking in the footsteps of civil rights giants, with them being right there with us every step of the way. And this is in front of Martin Luther King's house, where he lived with his family while he was the pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. Our congressman, he has such a way with young people. He just engages them, and these were ambassadors from the King Center for Peace, and they were out there just helping us along the way. The buses pulled up beside the barbershop where Dr. King and Abernathy, they would strategize. 2 blocks up, we walked into Dr. King's house, and it says here, minister home, and everything in the house was just the way it was when they lived there. This is his living room. I got in trouble because I took a picture, and she said, oh, no pictures. So respectfully, I stopped taking pictures. Right here on the porch, a concrete porch, there's a dent about the size of a bowling ball. And that is the very spot where the Ku Klux Klan bombed Dr. King's house when he was not home, but his wife and his children were home, and a member of the church. None of them were hurt. The bomb exploded on the porch, and that's what we have there. Okay? That night we had a reception at the Archives and History Museum, and Congressman John Lewis spoke to us. He was again interviewed by Dana Bash, and then it was time to leave Montgomery and drive to Selma. And so here in Selma, we at Brown Chapel AME Church, and this is the church where they organized before the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Reverend Jesse Jackson was there with us, and there were a lot of dignitaries there. There were so many people there that as we walked into the church, the fire department was standing there with a clicker counting every individual. And as we were going in, one choir left, and the pastor had to ask the fire marshal to please allow the guest choir in and deduct the numbers that left out. They had a choir come in from San Diego. Bishop C. Wright is the national spokesperson for the AME organization, and he was the keynote speaker that night. All right. And this is Congressman Norcross and myself outside the Martin Luther King statue, right outside Brown Chapel. Now, this is a little video of, I just want you to get the feel of what it was like as we walked across the bridge. You're not going to hear any sound. There's a lot going on. John Lewis, our congressman, making his move to the front there. Yeah. And, it was very intense. This was not just, even though we're talking about 50-something years later, everybody out there wasn't all for it. You had protesters out there. Selma, I wanted you to see the buildings. Selma is a very old town. It's not a metropolitan town. The median income is $12,000. They're very poor conditions. Their supermarket really, to me, looks like our Produce Junction on Mount Ephraim across from where Pathmark was. And so I find that the people of Selma, here we're approaching the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a very hot day. We're trying to find shade somewhere, it wasn't to be found. And, it was definitely an experience. Our buses were at the top of the hill. We had to get over to the other side. You couldn't even walk a full step. You had to just, we locked arms and we just walking as best as we could because there were so many people. Before we went into the church, it was almost like a ghost town. But once we came out of church, where'd all these people come from? And Selma didn't look that big to me. And Brown Chapel sits like in the middle of the project community. So it was a little tense moment there. Again, we had Capitol Police. We finally made it to the top, the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Again, we're here, Martin Luther III, and it was certainly an experience. And we certainly thank Congressman Donald Norcross, the Faith and Politics Institute. I want to play, if you can, the Martin Luther King III from minute 4, that clip.
Chris, will you wait for that? Why don't you tell them Senator Doug Jones, his relationship
Sure.
as prosecutor?
So Senator Doug Jones, when we were in Birmingham, and he is the current prosecutor, when he was in college, he would cut class to go to the courtroom because that was the first Klansman that bombed, that killed Viola Liuzzo. And he would sit in the courtroom and watch this trial. 37 years later, as a prosecutor, FBI tape came across his desk that was never heard before, and it gave evidence of the Klansmen saying that they were going to the river to make the bomb. Now, this is 37 years later. Some might wonder why you prosecuting these individuals 37 years later. He felt that he had to do it. Now, he had one shot at this. Even though he had the FBI tape, he didn't think that that was enough to convict these individuals. So what he did was he had to put Sarah Collins on the stand. Sarah Collins was the young lady who survived the bombing, but her sister Addie Collins perished in the bombing. Sarah lost an eye. Glass was lodged in her right eye, and she wound up losing an eye. This was extremely passionate for the congressman, as he talked earlier. That one exhibit that he made sure, he grabbed me by the hand and took me back to it. And it was the exhibit of one of the little girls. Her new shoes were there. And Sarah was telling the story that one of the girls got a brand new dress. And as the other girl was tying a ribbon in the back of her dress, the bomb exploded. When you watch the movie Selma, it starts out with the explosion. And if you saw the rock, it was about, maybe about like that was lodged in the skull of the girl that they had to pull out. And that exhibit just, the whole journey does something to you. It just does something to you. And I'll say this to you, in all due respect, we all have our situations and our experiences of the civil rights movement. And as I'm on this journey, I can hear some of my friends in this town, and I can hear them. We've been beaten, we've been hosed, we've been bitten for the right to vote, for the right for this, for the right for that. But when I experienced this, I said, no, you were not bitten, you were not hosed, you were not, dogs were not unleashed on you. I met the people who were. And they don't think like us. There's no hate in their heart. The people of Birmingham and Montgomery were absolutely amazing. To see the relationship that the white and black community have among each other is unbelievable. It can only be the love of Christ of what you experience down there. There's no hate. You'll hear this man and his delivery. I want you to listen closely when he talk about gun violence. And he'll explain to you why he don't hate.
Do we need to hook it up to the mic? Yeah.
And this is about...
Imagine that I would live in a nation that goes all over the world promoting democracy, but yet suppresses democracy right here at home. Voter suppression is real. I'm very concerned as we approach this 2018 election. Because there are some who, because they may not have a decent ID or the correct ID, that may not be able to vote. It's very sad, Congressman, as you know, there are about 170 democracies around the world. The United States votes at 138. That means 137 countries voted higher rates than us. There's something wrong with that. Now, part of it is suppression. Part of it is what has happened with gerrymandering. We know all the issues. We must do better. We need to have more online registration and same-day registration. We probably need to change the election from Tuesday. If you're going to throw a great party, as Chris Rock and others have said, would you throw it on Tuesday? We just kind of get it too hard of a tradition. We need to make it possible for everyone to maximize voter participation. That's what Congressman Lewis and others were doing when they marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And the tragedy is that not only that, the courts have decimated the Voting Rights Act. And I've heard many of you say that we're going to bring the Voting Rights Act back. And I believe that will be true, but I think the congressional complexion has to change in November. Because at this particular point, that probably is not going to happen. Now, we really don't know what is going to happen, because who would have thought just 6 months ago that a Me Too movement would begin and start taking down people like bowling pins for what they've been doing wrong. Man, we gotta step it up. Our game has been on. We have mistreated women for years. And there's something called gender inequality. How do we pay men or anyone who does a certain talent more because one is a male and one is a female? That's got to change. And guess what? It's going to change. My God, I knew, and I've been fighting against, not against guns, because I'm not against guns, but I've been fighting to have responsible gun legislation for years. You know I lost my father in 1968. My uncle mysteriously drowned in 1969. My grandmother was gunned down in the church, in Ebenezer Church, while playing the Lord's Prayer. So my father was killed by a white man. My grandmother was killed by a black man, so I could have hated all of y'all. But you know what I'm thankful for? I'm thankful for the spirit of forgiveness, because it teaches you to dislike the evil act, but to still love the individual. And so in America, we got to learn to forgive. So where I am today, I am so proud of the young people in Parkland. Tragic as it may be, 17 persons lost their lives. And I thought we were going to get legislation in Newtown. I said, now when these babies are killed, something's going to be done. These young people have said, something not only must be done, we're going to make sure it happens. They're leading us, quite frankly, because we have not done a good job. We have been irresponsible. We have been insensitive. And so I'm thankful to see this movement developing. So we don't really know what's going to happen. But what we know is people are coming together like never before. Organizing is being done in a different way than it was in recent times that I can think of. Certainly the modern civil rights movement taught us a lot of things. I think that many of us who purport to be progressives, we basically, when President Obama was elected, sat down. But our friends on the right continued to work 24/7. And so it created a climate in this country and a frustration in this country because people were stepping up in 2006 and 7, getting out of being impoverished to becoming middle-class citizens. And then the foreclosure crisis came and wiped them out, put them back into a hole much deeper than they had even been in. And many of those people, black and white and everyone, are still trying to get out of that hole. When you go out into the heartland, you realize the real challenges that have to take place. So there was a huge frustration in this nation. But the frustration that evolved into an election is causing people who did not work together to now begin to work together. It's a different day. So I have great hope. Let me end by thanking Faith in Politics for what you do every year, as Congressman Lewis and so many of his colleagues come here and other people from around the nation for this pilgrimage to learn, and hopefully you're moved by what you see. It really was a few good women and men. Most of the marches that Martin Luther King Jr. Was involved in were not masses of people. There were a few hundred people who were dedicated, determined, and committed to make a change. And they were willing to put their lives on the line. Dad used to say, if a man hadn't found something worth dying for, he isn't fit to live. And he carried that out himself in Memphis, working for the advancement of sanitation workers. So here we are today. And while we're engaged in this pilgrimage, I still believe that the best is yet to come.
All right.
We have to be perfect. We have to always be best. This is my final statement. When I was a institution, Antioch College. On that college, there was a statue, Congressman, as you know, of the educator Horace Mann. And on that statue was an inscription. And that inscription said, "Be ashamed to die unless you want a victory for humanity." Now I was 14 years old. I said, "My God, let me read that again. Be ashamed to die unless you want a victory for humanity." And I thought about that. I said, "Oh my God, that's grandiose." But you know what? We can win victories in our neighborhoods. Yes. We can win victories in our places of worship. Yes. We can win victories in our schools. We can win, some of us, victories in our cities. Some will win victories in our state. Some will win victories in our nation. And yet still, some may even win victories in our world. What those words basically mean are, be ashamed to die until you've done a little something to make the world in which we all must live a little better than it was when you arrived. Thank you, and God.
Careful. Thank you, my sister, my beloved sister, for hosting us. I want to thank your mama. I want to thank all of the people who marched with us, suffered with us, and who never, ever gave up. I come here just to say we've come a distance. Mrs. Abernathy and Jesse, we've come a distance. We made some progress, but we still have a distance to travel. We left this church on Sunday, March 7th, 1965. I was wearing a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks. I had in this backpack 2 books. I thought we would be arrested and go to jail, so I wanted to have something to read. Had 1 apple and 1 orange. Wanted to have something to eat. I had toothbrush and toothpaste. I wanted to be able to brush my teeth. I don't know what happened to my backpack. I don't know what happened to my apple and my orange. To my toothpaste, my toothbrush. But as I walked with 600 children of God, after we left the church, walked out. We moved to the bridge. And down below we saw a sea of blue. A young man by the name of Jose Williams from Dr. King's organization were walking with me. The 2 of us walking side by side. It was so orderly, so peaceful. No one said a word. We were walking on the sidewalk. We came to that point where a man identified himself and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march, and it will not be allowed to continue. You should go back to your homes or to your church." And Jose Williams said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." I said, "Major, may I have a word?" He said, "There would be no word." And you saw these men coming toward us with nightsticks, some on horseback, beating us, trampling us with horses. I was the first person to be hit. 17 of us were hurt and transported to the Good Samaritan Hospital. But I came back to the church before going to the hospital, Bishop. Came back here, and someone said, "John said something to the audience." And I stood up and said, "I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama to protect people who only desires to register to vote. And later we were taken to the hospital. Just think, in 1965, in this county, only 2.1% of black of voting age were registered to vote. People were told they could not read or write well enough. They couldn't count the number of bubbles on a bar of soap, the number of jelly beans in a jar. But we didn't give up. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Ralph Abernathy came to Selma on that Monday morning, and they visited us in the hospital. Dr. King said he had appealed to religious leaders to come to Selma. And on that Tuesday, more than 1,000 ministers, priests, rabbis, and nuns came here. And on Tuesday, they attempted to march again. And after the march, one minister by the name of Reverend James Reed, with two other ministers, downtown Selma was beaten. Reverend Reed was so severely beaten. He was transported to a hospital in Birmingham and later died. People died here. They gave blood here. And I said to the members of Congress, we have a moral obligation, a mission, and a mandate to fix the Voting Rights Act. Make it easy, make it simple for people to participate in the democratic process. I say today, the vote is precious. In a democratic society such as ours, it is almost sacred. Make it easy, make it simple for all of our citizens to be able to participate in the democratic process. Some of us remember when the Pope came and spoke to a joint session of the Congress. He said, we all are immigrants. We all come from some other place. Let's that the dream is free. Let's celebrate. We can do it. We must do it. When we leave here and go and walk across that bridge, we're going to be walking on sacred ground. So may peace be with you. Amen. Don't give up. Don't give in. Thank you very much.
We're moving right along, amen? We're doing well. We're doing well. We may have to skip the bus.
Oh my God!
Brother, where'd you get your t-shirt?
Right here, over there. Off that stand right there. Got it over there.
We wanted you to hear the words of Martin Luther King III, and at this time we're going to call the congressman back up.
Well, wasn't that great from both Whit and Chris? One of the conversations both Whip and Chris had when we come back is what are our next steps? So obviously this was one to share the experience and what we moved, and how can we make the world just a little bit better? And that's a question that each of us, I'm sure, ask ourselves so much each and every day. With that, I want to thank you all for coming. God bless you, and have an enjoyable evening.
Yes, I'm here with our board president, Ms. Martha Wilson. Ms. Wilson, talk to us today about this presentation with Congressman Norcross and what you think and how it's going to impact our students here in the city of Camden.
Well, I was blessed to be able to go on this journey, not the journey with the congressman, but I have had the opportunity to visit all three of the places that we've talked about. This should bring a reality to our students when they can see and hear people from the city of Camden who have been a part of this and experienced this. And this is truly a blessing that Reverend Collins has had the opportunity to bring it back, and for you to have the opportunity to record this so that our students will be able to see and be able to talk with them about what has been experienced by people from the city of Camden, and something just so historic. And on the eve of the death of Dr. Martin Luther King.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you very much, Madam President. We appreciate you and this opportunity to have a few minutes and word with you to share with our young people. Thank you. I'm here with Pastor Evans of 10th Street Baptist Church here at Icons Institution there in the Centerville section of Camden. Pastor, talk to us a little bit about today's presentation that Senator Norcross and Reverend Chris Collins put together. What was the impact and this impact of this day to you, to our young people, to our young students?
It was a great impact. Matter of fact, it's one of those impacts that naturally would take you back. And being from Chicago, back in, when it was mentioned in 1967, I was there with my father at Marquette Park. That was the March for Open Housing, led by Dr. King. That was the time when he was stoned in history. I was 12 years old. I was in that march. I didn't know about it then, but my father said, we have a struggle going on, and you need to see it, and you need to be there. So when I see this today, and this is a presentation that the nation should see, and it's unique that, Chris Collins had unique to get this footage, because this type of history allows people to embrace, and that's what it's all about. Sharing it and just talking it. But today, those here had a chance to embrace it a little more. It's fantastic.
Yes, sir. Well, we thank you very much for your time and opportunity. Keep up the great work, and we appreciate you.
No, I love you, man.
Yes, sir. Likewise. I'm here once again with Father Doyle, a great icon in our city, a man who's been working as long as I've been born, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to say a few words to you. Talk to us about the impact of this, what Congressman Norcross put together, what this means to the city of Camden and to our young people.
Well, I feel greatly honored on this holy day of Dr. Martin Luther King to hear the African American people talk about the wondrous civil rights movement. Just to hear it from people who were connected to it, and to feel their goodness, their courage, their reverence, to hear it, and to be lifting up the great heroes of that movement. And I don't think that Martin Luther King was killed by James Earl Ray. Not at all. He was murdered by the government of this country. And the other man that actually is blamed for shooting him, he didn't shoot him. It was sharpshooters from a different spot that killed him. And J. Edgar Hoover hated him with the most awful hate, and he tried to destroy him, the head of the FBI. And he wrote anonymous letters to him and to get him into trouble with his wife, and so he was awful, vicious, terrible, a murderer. So they set that up and they killed him. So it wasn't somebody for some money. He got money all right, but he had to be there, and that someday will be known how that happened. So I was just happy to be here, honored to be here, inspired by being here, all of that. So the African American people have a heroic history. What happened in the civil rights movement is heroic and will be told 1,000 years from now.
Yes, sir. Father Doyle, thank you very much for your time. I'm so honored to take the opportunity to get an interview. I know you don't interview a lot, so I feel humbled and honored by my fellow board member, Miss Sister here, who's always working in the community. We appreciate you and always appreciate your service to our community. Thank you very much. Greetings, and we're back, and I'm here with the sheriff of Camden County, Gilbert Wilson, who actually went on the journey and talked about it. We just saw some of the impact. What is the impact that you think this will have, this day that you all put together along with Congressman Norcross, the impact it's going to have to the students here in the city of Camden?
That's the biggest thing. I've seen all these young people here tonight, and something to understand the history of it all, to have somebody who actually went there and bringing it back and telling the story, like Congressman Norcross and also Reverend Collins, and myself being there, as I say, ground zero, civil rights movement, it has a better impact, I think, on young people. Somebody actually been there, not just reading a book, actually being there themselves and seeing it. So it's great to see young folks out. This place was packed, a lot of young people, and to hear about the history that we want and seeing ourselves, and then to hear from us, I think it's great. The pictures that Reverend Collins had was outstanding.
Yes, it was. It was a great evening. But thank you very much, Sheriff. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We appreciate it. There you go. We have Sheriff Gilbert Wilson, and we'll be back with some other guests. I'm here with Nichelle Pace, and Nichelle Pace is here to talk about some interesting things. She lost some family members in the Charlotte shooting, and what would you like to share? What impact do you think this is going to have on the young people here in the city of Camden? You are from Camden, or from
Yes,
okay.
I was born in Camden, lived here till I was 6, moved to the suburbs, but now I am back and I own an office here in Camden. I have a business, a marketing business. But I think this had a big impact, not just for me and the children in Camden and my children, because it makes a direct connection to the violence and the forgiveness and that struggle that we have constantly. Basically, I've lost 2 family members in the Charleston 9, and I would never, ever think that could have happened to not 1, but 2 family members on the same day, because a lot of my family is from South Carolina. They're from the Charleston and Beaufort area, but just so happened that 2 of my family members were in the church that day, our cousins. So DePayne Middleton Doctor and Sharonda Coleman Singleton were our 2 family members, ladies, beautiful women that we lost that day. So I think this helps that we have so many diverse people to see these types of presentations and get a feel for what happened and understand how we can actually move forward and into that path of forgiveness, because it's hard. It's hard. So.
Okay. Well, I thank you for your time, and we look forward to bringing you back and talking about that story, the impact that Camden have with people with events around the world. So I thank you very much.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
I'm here with Camden's own, Camden High graduate, Brother Lando Pettigrew, who I've been knowing for a very long time here in the city of Camden, doing such a wonderful job, being a role model impact. Talk to us about what this day, this event that Senator Norcross and our good friend Reverend Chris Collins put together. What's the impact it would have on our young people?
First of all, I was glad to be a part of this program. I didn't see any other way that I wouldn't be here.
But just to give the kids an overview of what the past was about and to show them how important it is to relate the past with the future and so on and so forth. So I was overwhelmed with some of the information that I heard. So some of it I hadn't heard yet, even though I knew the overall struggle of the civil rights movement. So definitely it was very uplifting, and I was glad to be here.
Well, Lando, it's always good to have you here. Say a few words. Love you more, brother. Thank
Good
you.
seeing you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right. I'm back with the man that put it together, our congressman here, Congressman Donald Norcross. Thank you very much for taking the opportunity to talk to our young people here in the city of Camden. You know, talk about the impact and how this is going to impact not only the region, but particularly some of our young people here in the city of Camden.
Well, first of all, it's 50 years, which is hard to believe. I was a young boy at an elementary school in 4th grade, and to hear about it back then, it really didn't make sense. You know, you're young, 8 years old, and to experience firsthand, first going to Memphis and going to the Mason Temple Church where Dr. King gave his last speech, that mountaintop speech, just made such an impact on me. And then, you know, we went over to Lorraine Motel where, you know, he was assassinated. It's just, looking back, how much the world has changed because of what he did. And quite frankly, for giving his life has made such an impact. And yet, you know, after going through the 50th anniversary of John Lewis crossed Edmund Pettit's Bridge with the President of the United States, Barack Obama, I thought how far we've come. Reflect on today and how far we have to go.
Yes, sir.
You know?
Well, we definitely appreciate the opportunity, and think it was a great presentation that Reverend Collins and you all put together, and I think that you can continue to do a wonderful job. If the rest of the country can take a look at what Camden County and what Camden City is doing when it comes to civil rights, we appreciate that.
You know, as so many people have talked about, to have Reverend Chris Collins, Sheriff Whip Wilson, and myself, who all saw the same thing, but through different lenses, and how it impacted and affected us, I think was the part that we were trying to get across and have a conversation, that working together, nothing is impossible.
Well, we thank you for bringing it to the classroom, and our young people will be able to take a look at this. And we want to thank Congressman Donald Norcross, and along with Reverend Chris Collins and the County Sheriff, Mr. Gilbert Wilson, for putting this together. And thank you. We'll see you again.
Peace.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it. Well, here we're going to close it out with Reverend Chris Collins. Reverend Chris Collins, you did a wonderful job. This was a great presentation. I'm pretty sure our young people will be impacted by the journey that you, along with our Sheriff Gilbert Whip Wilson and Congressman Donald Norcross, is going to close this out, brother.
All right, man. Well, Minister Wasim, I want to thank you and the Camden City School District for giving us the opportunity to be featured on our great Channel 19. It was extremely important to have some of the students here. The question always come up when we do things like this, have we made progress? And we know as a nation that we have made tremendous progress. We just experienced 8 years of Barack Obama as President of the United States of America. And although we made progress with black folk being in key positions around the world, there's still a lot of progress that need to be made. And though we continue to make progress, we have to be extremely careful because in our communities we're digressing. And when you take this spiritual journey, this pilgrimage, and you meet individuals of the South, they think different of black people in the North. They think, number one, that if black people in the North just stick together, we would be so much further. Black people in the South in Alabama, they had no option. They were going to school. They were going to college. So it's absolutely necessary for each and every young person to take a look in the mirror, man. My favorite song of all time is Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror. Take a look at yourself in the mirror and set that determination, all right? In order to be the greatest leader, you must first be the greatest servant. And the greatest question of all is, what have you done to serve others? So that was Dr. King's motto, his mission, and he said we can't give up. We've come a long way, but there's so much further to go, and we can't give up. I definitely want to thank everybody that came out in attendance. We put this event together in a short 2 days, and we put the call out, and we had probably well over 75 to 100 people in here tonight.
Great event. It was very impactful, and I'm pretty sure our young people will enjoy this. Well, Reverend Collins, thanks again for bringing me along on a journey. Lifetime friend, and we appreciate it.
Friend, man. Listen, I don't have to tell a story. You taught me how to paint in 5th grade. We've been together since 2nd grade. We graduated together. And for those of you that's watching this channel, and Miss Roletta Cream is not here to confirm, but I interviewed her personally in the Anointed News Journal, and she has declared to me, she wouldn't say it publicly, but Camden High class of 1986 is the greatest of all time.
That's for
God
sure.
bless you.
Have a great evening.